Saturday, 11 p.m. Got called down to the worst part of Ankh-Morpork, the Shades, to investigate a crime. Looks like the victims were incinerated. Could be a dragon. Need to find some witnesses and ash them some questions. Yeah! Bum, bum, bum. Anyway, sorry about that, and welcome back. I am Alan Walker, and this is the Library of Alexandria. Today, I will be reviewing Terry Pratchett's Guards. This is one of my favorite books in the Discworld series, if not one of my favorite books really ever of any series. Should you read it? Absolutely. You absolutely 100% should read this. In fact, you don't really even need to finish watching this review. You can just stop it now, go buy the book, read it, come back, talk about it, and tell me how right I was. Now, the Discworld is a world very much like our own. It is an actual disc, so the Discworld is flat. So it's this flat disc that rides atop the 4 world elephants that themselves ride on the back of the Great Tatooine, which is this huge space turtle that just kind of swims slowly through space toward the end of the universe. Now, the Discworld books can really be broken down into 6 different categories or storylines. We have his first novels, A Color of Magic and Light Fantastic. They start the wizard stories, or the Rincewind stories, and they deal a lot with magic and the consequences of magic. It follows this cowardly wizard Rincewind, who is constantly getting into trouble and avoiding it as much as he can, but it also shows us the Wizards of Unseen University, which is the college, essentially, where all wizards go and often work at. So it's really kind of the proto-Hogwarts. There's also the Witches books, which deal with these 3 witches, and they deal a lot with fairy tale and myth. And so you see a lot of fairy tales kind of turned on their head, because these 3 are the wicked witches that show up in various fairy tales. And so they just follow fairy tale creatures and mythology kind of things. Then you have the Death books, which follow Death, the Grim Reaper himself. And they deal a lot with the anthropomorphication of abstract ideas. There are all these abstract things that are kind of given form. And so it's just very deals with belief and concepts a lot. And Death, he does his job, but he really doesn't particularly enjoy killing people. He has an adopted daughter. He likes humans. And so he's constantly trying to do what's expected of him. For example, in Death's house, he has a bathroom because he knows all houses are supposed to have bathrooms. And there are towels hanging up in the bathroom because he understands that bathrooms are supposed to have towels, but the towels don't work. They're just kind of part of the wall because he doesn't understand how towels work. He just knows that nice bathrooms should have towels. And then you have the Guards books, which are really more film noir or the old school mystery detective novels, where you have these guards who are part of the city's Night Watch, and they may not be the most competent people in the city, and they certainly aren't the most well-respected, but when this great crime happens in their city, they're like, not on our watch, and they go out and they're gonna set wrongs aright. There's also 2 other categories. One is more recent, starring Moist von Lipwig, which deals with kind of city institutions like the Postal Service or the Royal Mint. And then you have the standalone books like Small Gods or Pyramids that are just kind of one-shots that take place in the Discworld, but they don't really have a lot of recurring characters that we see elsewhere in the Discworld novels. And so Guards is the first of the Guards series, and really probably my favorite. Guards is very much has that film noir feel where it's always foggy or raining, and our hero isn't really that heroic. In fact, the first time we see the main character, Captain Vimes, who is in charge of the Night Watch, he's passed out drunk in an alley because he drinks all the time to kind of drown his sorrows. We don't know why he's trying to do that, other than what one of the other characters says is that he was laid low by a woman, and we don't really need to know because we've seen this archetype before. He's this guy who's just down on his luck and maybe at one time was competent. And Vimes has this really everyman spirit that I tend to root for. If you've seen in my other reviews, you see that I root for kind of the everyman much more than the omnipotent, ooh, I'm so powerful, oh, look at me, I can fight off a whole army by myself. That's not as interesting to me as these guys who are flawed, have human qualities like the rest of us. And Vimes is very human and very flawed and not super bright, but he knows his city, and he is not going to tolerate this threat to his city that he has sworn to protect, because deep down in him, when he's sober and beneath all of the drink, there is this spark of justice and what is right and what should be right and what a guardsman should be. But it's kind of like an atrophied muscle because he hasn't used it in so long. And so over the course of the book, we get to see Vimes kind of flex that muscle and go after what's right and kind of turn into the guardsman that he really does want to be. And so since I'm already talking about the characters, Guards is just filled with amazing, colorful, hilarious characters that you really root for, sometimes hate. And this is a Pratchett kind of staple. All of his books have these really relatable but at the same time larger than life characters. At the start of the book, the Night Watch consists of Samuel Vimes, the captain, and only two others, Sergeant Fred Colin and Corporal Nobby Nobbs. Now, Sergeant Colin, Pratchett describes as just this large guy who doesn't like to exercise, who rose to sergeant. Pratchett describes him as a guy you definitely see as like the quintessential sergeant. When you think sergeant, you think of someone like Sergeant Colin, but you could never see Colin rising any higher than sergeant. And so then we've got Corporal Nobby Nobbs, who is like this little, like 4 foot tall, hairy guy who like is engulfed by his helmet. You don't really know what race he is. It says that he's from the human race, but you only know that because he carries a card around that says he is. And he's just like the ruffian street fighter, steals from people, really likes to kick people in the nerds, and is just always trying to like get a leg up. He's your street survivalist. And so none of the three of them are really morally spotless or in a place to rise above the place that they found themselves in. But then along comes this guy named Carrot, who is a dwarf because he was raised by dwarves, despite the fact that he has grown up to be over 6 feet tall. It's very much like the beginning of Elf. Carrot, as a baby, was given to a king of the dwarves and was raised among dwarves and never really questioned that he wasn't a dwarf, despite the fact that he always hits his head on the door frames and things like that. And so his dad finally sends him to the city to join the city watch because he thinks the dwarf hasn't been to the city in ages. So he thinks the city watch is like a noble profession. And he tells him that to do good, he's got to know the law and enforce the law. And to enforce it, he's got to know it. And so he gives him this like 200-year-old book of Ankh-Morpork law. And dwarves in Pratchett are really, really literal. And so the dwarves here think that he really needs to know every one of these laws. And so he shows up and he starts arresting people that the watch don't arrest anymore. He chases after people and catches them, to the horror of the other guards. Colin and Nobby are aghast that he actually runs after criminals to catch them, because before the book started, they had just lost the 4th member of the watch because he chased someone and ran fast enough to catch them, when their kind of like motto is run, so hey, stop, no, don't run, but you don't want to catch them, because that's how bad things happen. That's how violence is visited upon your person. And so Carrot really is the moral center of the guard, and through his actions and the main threat right from the back of the book, the dragon that's unleashed, those two things really elevate Vimes, Colin, and Nobbs to want to be better than they are. Because really, in all of them, in Vimes and Colin and Nobbs, they really do want to be good guardsmen. They just lost their way. Now, there are 3 other main characters outside the guards in this book. And the first one is Lady Sybil Rampkin, who's from one of the oldest families back from the nobility of Ankh-Morpork. And she's described as just this mountain of a woman who Pratchett says you would have seen in like one of those Wagnerian operas with the braids down and the breastplate and the... And she wears a wig because she works with dragons. Her big thing is she keeps dragons and breeds them because noble people want to be seen with these little bitty dragons. These are called swamp dragons, and the guards go to her to kind of get information about the actual big dragon that's attacking them. And she can like stop people with her voice because her voice just carries that much authority. And she's also kind of there as the unlikely romance with our hero. And so that's just hilarious to watch because she is about the highest in society you can get, and Vimes and the guard are about the lowest in society you can get, and she's a woman, which make all three of them super uncomfortable. So it's hilarious to watch the interaction between Vimes and Rampkin especially. Also, we have the Patrician, who is the leader of Ankh-Morpork. Lord Vetinari, the Patrician, is what every other author wants to write when they're writing that incredibly intellectual gentleman villain, the one that is unflappable by anything and has Xanatos Gambit on top of Xanatos Gambit, where anything that happens was part of his plan. And so many authors do it so poorly, where the plans don't make sense and the villain is insufferable, but Pratchett writes him so well. Every author should look at Vetinari, the Patrician, as the template for all of those villains. He's just always polite. Every word he says has about 20 subtextual words, all just dripping with threat. He's this rail-thin guy that doesn't have any kind of physical presence, but just has this massive, like, authoritative presence that makes everyone really on edge when they're near him, and he cultivates that. We also have the Librarian, who is in a bunch of Discworld books, actually. In the first two Discworld books, Light Fantastic and Color of Magic, a magical accident changes him into an orangutan, but after the events of those books are over, he liked being an orangutan because he thought it was better than being human, and so the wizards at Unseen University kind of kept him on. So he's just this big old orangutan that tends the library. All he says is eek or ook, and if you call him a monkey, he will beat the tar out of you. And the guard has to deputize him at some point to kind of help them solve the mystery. The librarian's just ridiculous, but amazing. And so, like I said, the plot of Guards, and this isn't spoilers, it happens in the first pages of the book, is dealing with this dragon that has been summoned into the city. And so the thing Vimes and the other guards have to figure out is, how was the dragon summoned, who summoned it, and how to get rid of it. And all of the guards books really have a mystery at their heart. And the mystery here, for us, we see how the dragon was summoned, and we even know why. But what we don't know is who summoned it. And Pratchett does a really good job leaving us clues to figure out who the murderer is. In all of his guards books, he does a good job of kind of leaving those clues to make it possible for the reader to find out. Because I don't know about you guys, I like when I'm able to kind of piece it together and figure it out before the big reveal, and you're like, oh, how is that even possible? I don't enjoy those books or TV shows or movies where that happens, but Pratchett does always lay the groundwork to where you can just put the clues together to figure out who is responsible for the crime. And that kind of makes you feel like a detective alongside Vimes and Carrot and Colin and Knobs. And there's one more character I didn't talk about, and that's the narrative itself. Terry Pratchett's writing style is such that the narrative itself becomes your companion. It's like someone's reading the story to you. The narrative, it's really brisk, it flows really well, but it's constantly making a cultural reference or a joke or a pun or turning a cliche on its head, or just cleverly flipping a word, using a different definition than the standard definition, but pretending like he's using it in that aspect. And it's also very specific. Every one of his jokes are extremely specific. They're not broad. Every analogy he makes is just really, it's humor by specificity. And so through this narrative, he takes us along like by the hand with the story. He'll often do some explaining, some world building within there, but Pratchett never does any world building without adding a joke or a pun there. And if he needs to extend the joke, what he does is he puts a footnote or puts an asterisk, and then at the bottom there's a footnote. For instance, he's talking about how the Patrician tolerates pretty much anything in Ankh-Morpork, and then it says except for mimes. And then there's an asterisk, and at the bottom it says Vetinari rounded up all the mimes and threw them in a scorpion pit, and on the side of the wall it says learn the words. He doesn't interrupt the narrative flow to show you that, but you obviously are going to follow to the footnote to get the rest of that joke. He'll even kind of make up words and just throw it in there with no fanfare. It doesn't point, nothing draws attention to it. You just have to be paying attention. I wrote this part down because I just thought it was extremely clever. There are some rats that are just dragging something really roughly, and the term that we would all use is manhandle. They're manhandling this thing. But instead, just in the prose, he says that they rat handled it. Doesn't call attention to it, just changes manhandle to rat handle, which isn't a word, but they're not men, they're rats. And there's stuff like that all the time that just tickles my funny bone. And then I'll write it down. Pratchett is one of the most skilled wordsmiths that I've had the pleasure of reading. His word choice is it's just perfect every time. The prose itself also relies heavily on pop culture references from all time periods. And you can absolutely enjoy a Terry Pratchett book if you're not really big on pop culture, if you haven't seen a ton of TV or movies or read a bunch of classic literature. But for those who have, it's absolutely more rewarding to just see him toss those things out. I mean, Guards has references to Dirty Harry, to Casablanca, to the Charge of the Light Brigade, and I'm sorry, unless you've read Charge of the Light Brigade, no one's gonna get a Charge of the Light Brigade reference. It's awesome. And so Pratchett is constantly thwarting these expectations we have, even from the opening scene of the books. The opening scene is just dark and it's storming, and there's this guy in like dark robes, and he sneaks through the rain to knock surreptitiously on the door, and a view hole opens, and they exchange passwords. But halfway through the password giving, we realize the guy is giving the wrong password because he's got the wrong door. And the guy's like, no, your secret society doesn't meet here. Our secret society meets here. You guys are like 3 doors down. And so we've all seen that scene of the sneaking through and meeting the secret society. But here, there's so many secret societies that you can get mixed up about which door you're supposed to go to, and they have to share their secret hideout with the Ladies' Bridge Club, which meets every Tuesday. And it's just hilarious how he consistently does this. That opening scene is very, very Monty Python. If you're familiar with that kind of humor, you will absolutely just eat that up. And all 3 of the guards are not educated men. Vimes can read and write a little bit, and so can Colin. I'm not sure if Nobby can, but uneducated people talk like they're uneducated in Guards. And the educated speak like they are. You can definitely tell the difference in someone's class based on their dialogue. For example, in scenes with Ramkin, the noblewoman, and Nobby, he doesn't have to use a lot of dialogue tags like Nobby said, Ramkin said. You can tell based on all the apostrophes to contract words that it's Nobby talking versus Ramkin's dialogue. Just a couple of examples of what I'm talking about with the dialogue and the prose. There are so many, but here are 2 that I wrote down because I thought they were hilarious. A number of religions in Ankh-Morpork still practiced human sacrifice, except they didn't really need to practice anymore because they had got so good at it. And here we have what I'm talking about, where Pratchett takes the meaning of one word, or a word that has 2 meanings, and kind of uses them in different ways. Practicing human sacrifice means to use as a ritual, to engage in as part of a religion. But here, he has it as practicing like a sports team would to get better at something. And it's just brilliant. Sergeant Colin owed 30 years of happy marriage to the fact that Mrs. Colin worked all day and Sergeant Colin worked all night. They communicated by means of notes. They had 3 grown-up children, all born, Vimes had assumed, as a result of extremely persuasive handwriting. I don't know how you don't find that funny. That's comedy gold! This has one of the better and more satisfying endings of a Terry Pratchett book. Pratchett books tend to end in a conflagration of magic where there's a lot happening and much of it abstract, and so you have to keep a lot of things that are hard to visualize in your head. That's really my only complaint about Terry Pratchett novels, are the climaxes, the kind of ending where everything goes pear-shaped, as Pratchett would write. This one doesn't end in a conflagration of magic. It ends in a perfectly logical series of events that are easy to follow. It's very satisfying, wraps things up nicely in a very satisfying bow. And the Guards books in general do a better job of having these more coherent endings than the other Discworld novels. And Guards just ends with you dying to read the next one, and I devoured it. This is like my 4th time reading it. I read it in like a matter of days. The prose just pushes you on. You're constantly, it's hard to put down because every page is important, kind of leading to the solving of that mystery of what's gonna happen with the dragon. It's just so good, so easy to read. Can't recommend it highly enough. And so, rating time on the Kingfin approval system from horrible minus all the way up to superb plus. I absolutely give this book a superb to superb plus. 5 stars, 100% all the way. This is a fantastic book. It's the perfect embodiment of a Pratchett book. It even lacks some of the typical Pratchett flaws where it drags a little bit, where nothing's really happening, or travel. Travel tends to be boring. It lacks really all of that. It's just page turn from beginning to end. It's one of my favorite books of all time. If you've never read a Pratchett book, go out and buy it. Congratulations. I've introduced you to probably the best one there is. If you like this video, say so in the comments. If you've read Guards and you agree with me, say so in the comments. If you hated Guards, say that and we'll have a conversation on why you are incorrect. If a different Pratchett book is your favorite, tell me that as well. I cannot wait to talk to you guys more about this Pratchett book and upcoming Pratchett books, but thank you guys for watching and I'll see you next time. Looks like the victims were incinerated. Could be a dragon. Need to find some witnesses and... Wrong glasses! Oh my gosh!